in the grand halls of an old Scottish manor, where heavy drapes whispered with every breeze and the family silver gleamed with a cold, distant light, there was one drawer, small, unremarkable. Yet inside it lay a secret that would one day shatter not only the life of Margaret Campbell, Duchess of Argyll, but shake the very foundations of British high society. Still, if one looks deeper into her life, it becomes clear. This scandal was no accident. It was the inevitable climax of a journey Margaret had begun long before she ever took a title or a husband's name. She wasn't born in castles, but in the roaring pulse of New York City, though to a family whose wealth opened every door. Her father was a Scottish millionaire, and Margaret herself seemed from childhood to step straight out of a society magazine. Graceful, magnetic, with a cool, aristocratic beauty that hinted at something untouchable. In America's most prestigious schools, she was surrounded by the young heirs of capitalism, sons of tycoons, bankers, politicians. But there was always something in her that resisted, an unruly spark, almost faded, as if she had been born to disrupt whatever world she entered. By 15, Margaret already understood the power she held over men. Her beauty wasn't just noticeable, it was disarming. Perhaps that's why she was drawn so quickly into the deep waters of adult life. In the summer of 1928, on the Isle of Wight, she met David Niven years before his Hollywood fame, then just an impossibly handsome, confident 18-year-old. It wasn't just a holiday romance. It was a collision between a girl's fragile dream and the reckless force of youth. Their affair was brief, but its consequences lasted far longer. For Margaret, it was her first love, and her first betrayal. Months later, she discovered she was pregnant. In those days, for a girl from a respected family, it was nearly a social death sentence. The word disgrace hung over their home like a storm cloud. Her parents were furious but decisive. They silenced the story and sent her to London, far from gossip's reach, where a private clinic performed a secret operation. The abortion was so deeply buried that even decades later, Margaret never spoke of it in her memoirs. Perhaps it was her final effort to preserve something untouched, a piece of herself still untainted. Yet just 2 years after that tragedy, Margaret returned to society as if nothing had happened. In 1930, she was introduced at court as a debutante. White gown, pearl earrings, perfect posture. It was as if she had erased the pain, mastering the art of hiding wounds behind a flawless smile. But the scar remained, transformed into something else. Resilience, a reckless thirst for life, defiance, and a flair for scandal that would repeatedly make headlines in the British press. Her story isn't just the drama of one woman. It's the drama of an entire era, an age where elegance often masked emotional wounds, where secrets were kept in drawers, and real life began where respectability ended. Margaret Campbell, Duchess, beauty, rebel, will always remain a symbol of that contradiction. Between freedom and duty, between the longing to be oneself and the pressure to be perfect. She entered the room the way one might enter a sacred hall, slowly, with grace, carrying a blinding confidence that came not from name or status, but from an innate sense of magnetism. With every passing year, Margaret grew only more radiant. Time didn't steal her youth, it transformed her into a legend. And in the season she was introduced at court, no one questioned it. She was the debutante of the year, the embodiment of grace and brilliance. Men fell at her feet, each one serious, full of promises, hopes, and intentions. But the more admirers surrounded her, the harder it became to choose. Not that it was ever a simple decision for Margaret. A restless spirit stirred within her, a longing for life, a hunger for freedom, a quiet defiance. She was never meant to be just someone's wife. On the surface, everything seemed proper. Polite meetings, charming smiles, waltzes under crystal chandeliers. But behind the scenes, whispers began to spread. She claimed to be searching for stability, yet her actions told a different story. Bold, passionate, and provocative. Her affairs weren't merely with powerful men, but with icons of the era. One of them was Prince Ali Khan, an Eastern aristocrat known for his charm and lavish gifts. Another was aviator hero Glenn Kidston, a romantic daredevil of the skies, and the man she truly fell in love with. Kidston was wild, untamed, like a storm itself, and that's what captivated Margaret. Though he was already married and had a young son, she surrendered to the affair without hesitation. Perhaps she knew that love born of defiance rarely lasts, but burns with unmatched intensity. Some called her the new Helen of Troy, such was the power and peril of her allure. Just as passion threatened to turn into scandal, fate struck first. In the spring of 1931, while gardens bloomed outside and her soul stirred with its own awakening, Margaret received devastating news. Glenn was dead. His plane, flying into a dust storm, disintegrated mid-air, nature itself, it seemed, rejecting the audacity of his flight. He was gone in an instant. No farewell, no chance to make things right. And with him, it wasn't just the sky that collapsed. Her carefree youth ended that day. Glenn Kidston's death shattered the illusion of eternal spring, silencing her flirtations and leaving behind a pain too private to display. What remained was the memory of a man who blazed through her life like a comet, brilliant, swift, and impossible to forget. In the years when the world was still reeling from the aftermath of war, Margaret faced a quieter, more personal devastation, one without bombs or sirens, but just as destructive. The death of Khan, the man who may have been her great love, left her with a hollow emptiness she didn't know how to confront. Grief swept through her like a storm, but instead of facing it, she plunged into new relationships. Not out of love, but out of a desperate fear of being alone. First came Charles Greville, the fabulously wealthy and titled Earl of Warwick. Almost simultaneously, she accepted a proposal from Max Aitken, heir to a powerful publishing empire. But neither man offered the solace she was seeking. In a whirlwind of passion and despair, Margaret broke off both engagements and chose a third, Charles Sweeney, a business-minded, athletic man who seemed safe, stable, and dependable. With him, she hoped to rebuild her life and finally find the quiet harbor she'd always dreamed of. Reality, however, had other plans. In her youth, pregnancy had come easily back then. Everything seemed simple. But with Sweeney, every step toward motherhood felt like a mountain climb, one from which she was repeatedly and cruelly thrown back. 8 miscarriages followed, one after another, each one cutting deeper than the last. And then, in 1933, when she was 8 months pregnant and hope had cautiously returned, fate struck a final blow. The baby girl was stillborn. She tried again, and by 1940, Margaret had given birth to 2 children. But the cost was staggering. Her once bright smile faded, and a shadow crept into her eyes. The years of pain left marks on her soul that even the soft glow of a nursery couldn't erase. Then came the fall, literally. It happened at a clinic on Bond Street during what should have been a routine appointment. The elevator doors opened onto an empty shaft, and Margaret plunged 40 feet. That she survived was nothing short of miraculous. Doctors later said it may have been her instincts that saved her. She clung to the elevator cable with such force that her nails were torn down to the flesh. With 33 stitches in her head, she returned home. But not as the same woman. Sweeney would later say that the woman who came back from the hospital was a stranger. Margaret's behavior changed. She became impulsive, erratic, at times reckless, as though some new force had awakened inside her. It was perhaps then that her former self began to unravel. Slowly, painfully, almost imperceptibly. Men came and went. There were fleeting affairs, a Texas banker named Joseph Thomas, a Metropolitan Museum curator, Theodore Rousseau. They were shadows along her path, not destinations but interludes before something, or someone, greater. Margaret was a woman who had been broken too many times. Yet each time, she rose again, piecing together the fragments of her identity into something new, sometimes dangerous, sometimes dazzling. And there was still more to come. More passions, more heartbreaks, more highs and lows. Her story was never easy, but it was undeniably human. When the winds of fate shifted once again, Margaret, who had already weathered a string of passionate but fleeting affairs, met a man who would prove not to be the love of her life, but her greatest ordeal. His name was Ian Douglas Campbell, the 11th Duke of Argyll. A Scotsman with the icy bearing of old nobility, a sharp temper, and a face that looked as if it had been carved from the harsh, jagged cliffs of the Highlands. There was something ominous about him, something that drew people in like the sky before a storm. He seemed the very embodiment of a Byronic hero, mysterious, merciless, and destined for tragedy. Margaret, with her fiery heart and unquenchable thirst for drama, fell for him, quickly, recklessly, and completely. Campbell had a castle in Inverary, ancient, crumbling, and as broken as he was. Behind its stone walls echoed not just Scottish history, but the scars of its master. He had survived a German POW camp in World War II, returning damaged, with shadows in his eyes and a reliance on alcohol, gambling, and pills that never dulled the pain. 2 failed marriages lay behind him, both ending in accusations of cruelty. The warnings were there, the signs unmistakable, but Margaret didn't run. She walked into the storm with her eyes wide open. In the spring of 1951, she became his wife, the Duchess of Argyll. Society cheered. Another grand wedding, another title, another wave of glamour. Her gown was praised in the papers, her style still considered impeccable. Outwardly, she dazzled. Inwardly, she was crumbling. Life with the Duke soon laid bare a chilling truth. This marriage was no union of souls. It was a transaction. The ink on the wedding certificate had barely dried before Ian began draining her fortune, pouring it into the restoration of his ancestral home as if he were building not a castle, but a tomb for their love. To him, she was not a partner, but a bank account in pearls. And Margaret changed too. Perhaps it was the old trauma, a fall down a lift shaft years earlier. Perhaps it was the deeper fragility she always hid behind vanity. She cared more about appearances than emotions, often joked about being a bird brain, masking a profound insecurity and aching loneliness. It didn't take long for her to realize her mistake. Beauty didn't save her. Charm didn't shield her. He looked at her the way he'd looked at his previous wives, with contempt, with restrained rage, with the cold desire to dominate. The house that once held dreams now echoed with fear and humiliation. And then came another heartbreak, her inability to give him a child. It widened the gulf between them. Cornered and emotionally shattered, Margaret made desperate choices. Rumors swirled that she tried to discredit his children from earlier marriages, allegedly forging letters to cast doubt on their legitimacy. It was a futile, frantic bid to seize back some measure of control, a last, doomed attempt to reclaim power over her own life. Margaret learned, as many do too late, that wealth cannot buy love. It offers no peace. It does not protect against sorrow. Sometimes, it only makes the fall louder and the pain more public. She was a woman of her time, glittering on the outside, cracked within. Her story isn't just a chapter of high society gossip. It's a portrait of fragility beneath the facade. A warning of how easy it is to lose yourself when you spend too long playing someone else's game. Sometimes a scandal is more than just a chain of unfortunate events. It's a soul laid bare, exposed to the world like an open wound. Such was the story of Margaret, Duchess of Argyll, a woman whose life became a gripping saga of betrayal, passion, and ruthless public disgrace. Margaret was never meant for a quiet life. From the very start, she lived on the edge, beautiful, dazzling, bold, and at times daring. Her youth was painted with the vibrant colors of high society balls, flirtations, champagne-soaked evenings, and piercing glances. But behind this glamorous facade hid a vulnerable soul, one deeply wounded, as some later claimed, after a mysterious fall down an elevator shaft. Was it an accident, or something more? Her ex-husband insisted the fall changed her forever, as if it had flipped her inner compass. The truth remains unknown. Her marriage to the Duke of Argyll was supposed to be a new chapter, a union of power and prestige. Yet peace was never truly part of that household. Behind the beautiful veneer lived suspicion. The Duke, a cold and distrustful man, increasingly caught Margaret returning late, wearing distant looks, carrying unfamiliar scents. His jealousy spiraled into paranoia. He went to extremes, ordering a wiretap on her car, desperate to know her every move, every breath. The real tragedy began when Margaret left for New York. Alone, the Duke's fantasies ran wild. Obsession drove him to break into her locked jewelry box with the help of a locksmith. In that act of betrayal, he didn't just confirm his suspicions. He unleashed a Pandora's box. Inside were photographs, not just any photos, but an intimate gallery. Margaret was unmistakable, wearing her signature triple-strand pearl necklace, a cherished piece she never removed. The men beside her were different, faces almost hidden, like a distorted mirror refusing to reveal the truth. One thing was clear, none of them was the Duke. This was her secret life, frozen in Polaroid snapshots. Armed with this evidence, the Duke launched a courtroom war. He accused Margaret of sleeping with 88 men during their marriage. 88, a staggering number, not just shocking for its scale, but for how it publicly destroyed a private life in full view of the nation. The press thirsted for scandal. They labeled her the Dirty Duchess, as if one woman could embody all the sins of the age. But Margaret refused to stay silent. She fired back, claiming the Duke had an affair with her stepmother. It was a devastating accusation that could have shattered anyone. Yet, on the crucial day of the trial, the witness meant to support her claim simply never appeared. Her words echoed unheard in the courtroom. The divorce battle dragged on for years. Not just a legal fight, it was a torment. Every day the papers screamed about her immorality, each headline tearing another piece from her reputation. And Margaret, she endured, as best she could, with style, with a dignity that became her armor. This wasn't just a trial, it was an execution under the relentless flash of cameras. Margaret's story is not simply one of infidelity. It is the story of a woman whose life was too vivid, too intense, for society to forgive. A woman who sought love, freedom, and the right to be herself, only to become trapped in a gilded cage of public condemnation made of gold, pearls, and fear. She survived the scandal, but history remembers her not just as a duchess, but as a symbol of how the cost of personal freedom for a woman can be devastatingly high. One gloomy morning, when Margaret's private photo collection suddenly became public, the world was introduced to the most infamous image of them all, the one where she kneels before a man without a head. Only the cropped edge of the photograph concealed his face, making it feel like a scene from a detective novel. Despite relentless efforts from the press, the identity of this mysterious headless figure remained an enigma, a secret that stirred imaginations and fueled scandals for years. Newspapers eagerly sifted through 88 possible suspects, men who had ever crossed paths with Margaret's life and heart, launching a hunt for the invisible victim. Among the suspects was Britain's defense minister, Duncan Sandys, a man whose story later intertwined with the legendary Churchill family. Was he the mysterious man? Possibly. But behind this name lay an even more intriguing figure, Hollywood actor Douglas Fairbanks Jr., a married man bound to Margaret by secret ties. The higher-ups managed to keep his name under wraps, yet the handwriting on the photo bore a striking resemblance to his, like a tender confession hidden in ink. Margaret remained silent. She refused to reveal names or destinies. This was her story, her secret, one she guarded fiercely, like a last bastion. But time and society were not on her side. Britain back then showed no mercy, and Judge Lord Whitley, acting as the moral arbiter, delivered his verdict with cutting sarcasm, calling her shameless and immoral. At that moment, freedom became a bitter curse for Margaret. Freed from the chains of marriage, she paid the price with a reputation shattered beyond repair. Though she never named her lovers, her fight against shame was fierce and, at times, almost darkly humorous. Margaret opened the doors of the very house where the scandal began and started hosting paid tours, as if trying to turn tragedy into theater and shame into profit. Yet despite all her efforts, her purse remained empty, and her hopes lay broken, much like her former life. This was the story of Margaret, a woman whose passion and fate collided with the harsh walls of society, leaving behind a legacy marked by pain, mystery, and courage. Her life was like a thunderous chord in an endless symphony of time. Vivid, conflicted, filled with soaring highs and crushing lows that sometimes felt unbearable. Margaret Campbell, known in certain circles as the Dirty Duchess, lived by her own rules from a young age, unafraid to challenge society's conventions and norms. Her taste for luxury and extravagance often bordered on provocative, but it was precisely this passion for brilliance and freedom that made her an unforgettable figure. Over the years, circumstances began to unravel her world. The family home, once alive with laughter and the buzz of high society parties, grew suffocating, forcing her to say goodbye to the last remnants of her past. Moving from the opulent Grosvenor House Hotel to a modest flat, insisted upon by her children and her first husband, Charles Sweeney, Margaret increasingly felt the fragile threads of her former life slipping away. By the late 1980s, her grandeur was fading, and the final flicker of dignity barely smoldered in the hearts of those close to her. Yet even as her strength waned, the Duchess's spirit refused to surrender without a fight. In a desperate bid to earn some income, she made a surprising return to television. What seemed like brief appearances and casual horse racing discussions on air became for Margaret a way to reclaim herself, to taste life once more. However, during a live broadcast of the popular show After Dark, exhaustion overcame her. She simply left the stage, explaining her departure with sleepiness. This moment was not just physical weakness, but a symbol of the loss of her former sparkle and confidence. By the early 1990s, her life had grown increasingly fragile and sorrowful. Loved ones, with both affection and sorrow, made the difficult decision to place her in a nursing home, a place seldom entered with hope, more often with resignation. There, in quiet solitude, tragedy struck once more. A fall in the bathroom broke her neck, and there was no saving her. Margaret passed away on July 25, 1993, just 4 months after the death of her first husband, Charles Sweeney, to whom she was bound not only by marriage but by a history of storms and trials. Her life played out like a theatrical drama full of passion and upheaval, leaving an indelible mark. Though the Duchess has left this world, her story continues to captivate minds and hearts. In 2022, the series British Scandal, inspired by her infamous legal battles, brought her back into the spotlight, and one can imagine her watching with relish, as if witnessing the final act of her own grand performance on the big stage. Margaret Campbell was obsessed with class, appearance, and proper manners. She often surrounded herself with a kind of social court, where the question was how to present oneself to the world. She is remembered for saying, "Always be a poodle, just a poodle, and 3 strands of pearls, that's all that really matters in life." This Duchess, who loved to shine and shock, remains alive in the memories of those who appreciate stories of lives blazing with fire, pain, and an unyielding will to live.